thank goodness it is Friday afternoon. That means another really live edition of Green Rush, the business of cannabis talk show that Pro Cannabis Media produces every Friday afternoon from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. That would be your Eastern time. I'm Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro Cannabis Media, and I tell you what, this one is really live. Last week, we had a little few technical difficulties because I forgot my computer before I drove down to New York, so it's my fault. But we ran a rerun, and everybody seemed to be happy. And we had some good stuff in the chat room. And but this is definitely really live. Joining me this Friday afternoon, and someone who's becoming more and more regular as a guest host, is Josh Kincaid from the Talking Hedge in Washington State. Hello, Josh.
Hey, Jimmy, I'm getting attacked by my cat live right now.
Hey, there you go. What's the name of your cat, Josh?
Panucci. It's French for
Panucci.
fudge. Yeah.
All right. And joining us from the nation's capital on this Friday afternoon is our dear friend from NORML. His name is Morgan Fox. Hello, Morgan.
Hey, Jimmy. Hey, Josh.
So here we are. You're in Washington, D.C. I'm in the Boston area, now in Clinton, Massachusetts. Check that one out on your map. And Josh is out in Washington State. So we've got the nation covered here. And I keep hearing these inklings, these rumors, these notes from different people that the lame duck Congress has a shot to reform cannabis laws. How accurate are those reports, Morgan?
Very accurate, although the exact nature of what that reform will look like is really difficult to tell at this point. The negotiations that have been going on between Senate leadership and Senate Republicans about exactly how far they're willing to go and what that balancing point is going to be between what Democrats are willing to support and what Republicans are willing to tolerate, basically, has been kept very close to the vest. I mean, I'll tell you, I was talking with a very prominent senator's staff just the other day, and they said that even they, after multiple requests, hadn't gotten the details about exactly where things stand yet. And I know that many of my advocate colleagues are feeling some similar frustration that we don't exactly know where things are right now. But I think a lot of it also depends on the outcome of the midterms, both in terms of what the makeup of the next House and Senate are going to be, but also how the 5 state legalization ballot initiatives are going to turn out, which, I mean, I think could have a real big impact.
Absolutely. You were talking about Missouri, North Dakota, Oklahoma, South Dakota, Maryland, and Arkansas, the 5. Of those 5, which one do you think is the one that is 50-50, may not pass?
Well, so Oklahoma actually isn't happening until March of next year. So, yeah, we're looking at Arkansas, Maryland, Missouri, North Dakota, and South Dakota. Arkansas is 50-50 right now. I am cautiously optimistic that it will pass. We've got about 11 days until the election, and I think that now that the opposition forces have pretty much done everything that they can do, including lying about what the initiative does, pitting supporters against each other, et cetera, that the campaign in favor is really hitting its stride right now and is going to make a big impact on voters as we go forward. Plus, there's a lot of undecided voters there. So I'm cautiously optimistic on that one. Maryland is looking like a slam dunk. Yeah. Washington Post reported 73% support just a little bit ago. And interestingly enough, from a policy and elections wonk like myself, I thought that poll was super interesting because we've always wondered about exactly what effect having cannabis policy reform and legalization measures on the ballot does for the rest of the ballot, whether it's down ticket items, overall voter turnout, et cetera. And really, I think that this might have been the first poll that really showed what impact legalization measures could have on turnout, particularly during a midterm election that typically sees a lot less turnout. And the turnout that it does see always tends to be older and more conservative. But that same poll showed that a majority of the people that were not intending to vote, they expressed that they didn't plan to vote when reminded that marijuana was on the ballot. completely flipped their decision and said that they absolutely were going to vote. So I think it's great to finally start seeing data like that, and I hope that we can get a lot more exit polling and more in-depth research on this concept going forward, so that we can determine exactly how these things affect broader elections and help us fine-tune strategy going forward.
Yeah.
Looking at Missouri, the polling is really all over the place. I mean, last month, two polls came out, one of them showing 62% and one of them showing 48% support. Um, Big undecided margins on both. So I think that it's anybody's guess. Um, I should note that Arkansas and Missouri seem to be the states where there is the most organized opposition, as well as the most establishment opposition. Uh, but in general, I think that these things both stand a chance of really doing well in the elections coming up. The Dakotas are an interesting situation. For North Dakota, we don't really have any recent polling to look at. Um,
Is there enough people in North Dakota actually to conduct a poll?
well, it'll take you 10 years to get around to everybody. uh,
Sorry.
and that's one of the problems with even getting things on the ballot in states like that, because it just costs so much more money to be actually able to reach potential voters and get those signatures. And then when you're talking about outreach, yeah, the media markets are small and relatively inexpensive to start to inundate, but actually getting across to people and doing real grassroots organizing is a lot more difficult when you're in places with lower population density. But we saw that in 2020, voters narrowly rejected a legalization measure in North Dakota. But then the following year, the state House of Reps approved a legalization bill that was then stalled by the Senate. Uh, the initiative this year is very much modeled on the version that the House passed, in order to kind of grease the wheels a little bit and make sure that it wasn't going to be challenged via lawsuit over its constitutionality should it pass, or even before it gets on the ballot. We're pretty confident that that one is going to pass. I'll bet possibly by a narrow margin, but it's impossible to tell at this point. South Dakota is the one that's really kind of a surprise. So, I mean, as you know, in 2020, South Dakota voters approved medical cannabis by a wide margin and adult use by a pretty decent majority. I think it was above 55%. First state ever, and a conservative state no less, to actually pass an adult use initiative without a pre-existing medical program in place. So, I mean, it was really a game changer. And then the governor decided to use taxpayer money to file a lawsuit to invalidate the measure. It went in front of a judge that she appointed, so of course the lawsuit was effective, and then the Supreme Court upheld the appeal. Interestingly enough, the most recent polling that we've seen shows that support for the measure is around just a little bit above 43%. Now, my colleagues on the ground there tell me that that polling is inaccurate. And I think that a lot of things can happen, between now and election day. I mean, generally, though, I think that seeing more than a 10% drop between people actually voting for something 2 years ago and then a very, very similar initiative coming up with, more than 10% less support, it seems a little questionable. So, I think we're going to have to wait and see on that. And admittedly, that most recent polling was from middle of summer. So I'm not sure how much we could trust it. We should take it with a grain of salt. Either way, my colleagues at MPP and a number of other coalition groups are working hard there, and I'm hopeful that the Dakotas will move as well. End of the day, though, we're looking at very, very, very likely at least one state being added after election day.
Right.
Morgan, did you say that it was a ballot initiative or legislative initiative? That
Ballot
last,
initiative.
it was okay.
Yeah. And here's an interesting thing about South Dakota. And we all know that Kristi Noem is the governor there, and she's the one who just would not accept what the voters voted in. And she led the charge. But wouldn't you know it? Back in August, which was only 3 months ago or 2 months ago, I've lost count at this point. She said she would pledge to implement cannabis legalization if voters approved the ballot initiative she said that at an event in August. Now, a lot of people think she's changed her tune because she's up for re-election. Is she up for re-election in 11 days?
Well, I mean, I think that even besides that, the amount of backlash that she got for overturning the will of the people and using taxpayer money to do so definitely hurt.
Yeah.
This is actually something that has become somewhat more commonplace as prohibitionists have increasingly lost the hearts and minds of the American people. They know that they can't win on the merit of their arguments because there are none. So they have increasingly turned to either keeping initiatives off the ballot or challenging them after they've won. And this is just patently anti-democratic. But when you don't have winning arguments, you don't have any choice other than to strip away people's voting rights. And it's a lot easier for groups like this to be able to influence lawmakers, um, largely because they're able to more easily, it's a lot easier to trick a small group of people into believing your BS.
Well, you have a small group of people down there that you haven't been able to manage that well over the last couple, dozen years or so, because there's only so many legislators down there, but they all seem to only be concerned about their own reelection. Josh, I know you've got a question or two. Go ahead.
I'm curious. You mentioned midterm, Morgan, and that how that may impact how things are moving forward. But I'm curious, does it actually matter? It seems bipartisan enough. Does it actually matter what happens in the midterms, or are we just on a train that's moving forward regardless?
Well, I mean, things are definitely progressing, and in one respect, I think that we're going to continue to see progress. I mean, we've got a ton of momentum, um, and also it's becoming more and more obvious to lawmakers across the political spectrum that not only is this an issue that their constituents and their bases support, um, but also that it is not just a fringe issue. It's actually something that they are prioritizing to a much greater level than their elected officials. So as these realizations start to increasingly dawn on lawmakers, I think we're going to see continued movement in the right direction. There are just some intricacies and nuances that might slow things down or speed things up depending on what happens. And there's so many different variables at play here. But I think that the outcome of the midterms in terms of who controls Congress or either chamber of Congress absolutely will have an impact on what is able to be accomplished in the lame duck. For instance, if Republicans win both chambers, then they have no real reason or political impetus other than the members that are active supporters of this issue to actually move something in the lame duck rather than waiting until the next session when they control things. The same logic goes for if Democrats retain control of both chambers. They no longer have that motivation to get something done under the wire, even though it would surely be very popular for their constituents, particularly in states that have already enacted modern, sensible cannabis policies. If the chambers remain split control, then I think we have a better environment in which to get things done in the lame duck, because it's anybody's guess what will be able to be accomplished in the upcoming session.
Speaking of, will he be able to delist anything? He mentioned that Biden mentioned that before. Was that just to create some hyperbole, or to create some buzz, or is he serious about that? He's actually have some action behind those words. And what's the most likely outcome, you think? Is he going to follow like the liquor, and how that was kind of just left up to the states? Have you heard any updates on that?
All right, so the Biden announcement that called on relevant federal agencies to review the placement of cannabis as a Schedule One substance, it was definitely very useful, because I think it highlighted the fact that Schedule One is an entirely inappropriate placement for cannabis. And it brought a lot of attention to it. There are a lot of people talking about it now. We've heard from these federal agencies that, including the FDA, that this is now a high priority to pursue this review process. However, in order to actually get this review accomplished is going to take a lot of work on the part of many different federal agencies. It's also going to require, if we want a positive outcome, heads of these federal agencies to basically backtrack and admit that they were wrong for decades. Very unlikely to happen. The process itself also takes years, even if it's being fast tracked. Now, if we are looking at the history of the schedule review petitions, NORML has been filing these petitions since 1970. And every single time it has taken years to even get the petition accepted. It's taken more years to even get the petition or to get the review process done. And then, as in the case in 1988, when the DEA's own administrative law judge ruled that there was absolutely no reason for cannabis to be on Schedule 1, and that in fact it was, quote, one of the safest therapeutic substances known to man, the DEA said, that's not binding. We're not going to follow that. And that has happened several times since then. So the idea that we can trust federal agencies to conduct this review process and arrive at the right answer that cannabis should be descheduled, because we all know that rescheduling would be an absolute disaster. It would not change the anything about the federal state conflict. It wouldn't decriminalize cannabis in any way, shape, or form. It would cause total chaos in state programs. But we can't afford to wait for this drawn out bureaucratic process, the result of which we are completely unsure of. But the fact that Biden has called for this review is incredibly useful, because it is adding motivation for Congress to step in and do it more effectively. Cannabis was placed in Schedule 1 by Congress, and I think that it will ultimately be removed from the schedule entirely because through Congress.
Hey, so I just got a, whatever this is, I guess it would be a news article. I never know if it's a newspaper article or newsletter or it's a distribution press release, but it's still saying that the DEA will have the final word about what happens with the cannabis scheduling. And it's weird because the FDA is the one that seems to be leading the charge to make changes, but both of these little organizations, the bureaucratic organizations in our country are all saying, well, we need to do more research. They can't do research because they've already screwed that up already. So where do you think this, if you were the president or you were the czar of the world, Morgan, and you could say, this is either a drug or a plant, therefore under the DEA or the agricultural world, where would it be most effective?
I think that's a very interesting question. We know that the FDA is not going to be able to effectively regulate cannabis as a plant. They can probably effectively regulate cannabinoid-derived or cannabinoid-based drugs. But really, when it comes down to it, there are a bunch of different agencies that are in charge of this. The DEA pretty much has final say, and they have structural inertia working against this. So I think it's very again, we're really going to have Congress step in and do this. And I'm hoping that the fact that Biden's announcement was met with overwhelming public approval across the political spectrum, with a few outliers like folks like Tom Cotton, will really help motivate Congress to address this issue and take it out of the DEA's hands, take it out of HHS's hands, and take it ultimately out of the FDA's hands, and then determine proper roles themselves for these federal agencies regarding cannabis and cannabinoid drugs and other substances going forward.
Yeah. The FDA Morgan, couldn't even come out with regulations for CBD after the Farm Bill passed. So I'm not real confident that they're going to do anything here other than to muck up the whole process. Josh, I'm sorry, I cut you off.
No, it's all right. I was going to ask if the recent news about Germany had any influence or any drive in making any of that happen faster.
I haven't heard any members of Congress really speaking about that.
Do they even know?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I think that Congress is kind of a weird place. They lean on international developments when it suits their purposes, and then ignore them when it doesn't. So I think that it's difficult to tell what sort of uh, impact Germany's impending legalization is going to have. Um, you know, one thing that I have been telling people for years is that the U.S. is in danger of being left behind in the international cannabis market um, because of the continued intransigency of federal law and of Congress. And so, if we're worried about all of the various factors that go into making the United States a continued top player in global markets, this is one area where we could pretty easily stop the slow ebb of the rest of the world passing us by.
Is there any shot of a federal cannabis agency being created, and its only concern would be the hemp world and the THC cannabis world? Is there any hope for that? And is it actually would add another layer of bureaucracy to this whole issue?
Well, there's been a lot of discussion about that, and I think that it's possible. I'm not necessarily sure that it's wise. There would still be a lot of other agencies that would have some interaction with cannabis and cannabis policy and cannabis regulation. And we know that there are already systems in place and agencies in place that have experience dealing with this sort of thing. Whatever aspect of the regulatory structure or control that you're talking about, and creating new agencies is incredibly difficult. I mean, it's hard enough to get the ones that exist to do their jobs right. Adding new ones is a whole other, jar of snakes. Not to mention, like, once you actually get it created, then you actually have to get it up and running and get it make sure that it's effective. That can take years, and we don't really want to prolong the process that much. I think that what is probably most likely is that there might be a new department built off of an existing agency that is primarily concerned with the restorative justice components of any sort of descheduling and regulation bill. But I tend to think that it would be a lot easier and a lot quicker to just effectively define what roles existing agencies have in this process.
Yeah, and lastly, I just want to get your reaction to what was the reaction to President Biden saying that he was going to let out, 6,500 pardon 6,500 federally convicted possession or nonviolent cannabis criminals. And of course, the entire industry and everybody's writing articles about this doesn't affect anybody, right?
Well, I mean, the 6,500 people that are eligible for it would say otherwise.
Well, who are they? Because I have yet to hear anybody say, here's an example of someone who was pardoned. That's what I'm waiting to hear, because most people are saying this was window dressing. At least this is the scuttlebutt I got out of New York last week.
Well, Chris Goldstein, NORML's Northeast regional coordinator, is one of the people that would be directly impacted by that and is eligible for a pardon. Also, you have to think that these go back to 1992 and up until 5 years ago. So there are a lot of people that that this is going to impact. And just because they're not activists and not in the public limelight doesn't mean they don't exist, and doesn't mean that those charges haven't been hanging over their heads, negatively impacting their ability to live a normal life and reach their full potential.
No, but I think the argument though was that there's not a single person that's in there simply for possession. They had other things that they had with them. So intent to distribute, for example, isn't simply just a possession. So there's not a single person that's going to be affected by that law unless they expand it.
No, that's not the case. What you're talking about is incarceration. Now, there may or may not be anybody that's in federal prison for simple possession charges. I tend to think that there aren't, but the simple possession charges definitely do happen, and there's roughly 6,500 people that it will impact.
So just to
And while
clarify, because I think we're talking about two different things. One is the people that are still in prison. One are the people that are out of prison. So you're saying the people that are out of prison can be affected, but no one in prison are going to. It's not going to help anybody.
Yeah, few, if any, people that are currently incarcerated will be directly impacted by this, other than to have that one charge pardoned. So and also the pardons actually only affect people who have been out of prison or out of supervised court release programs for at least 5 years up until the date of that announcement. So it doesn't really affect anybody that's in prison. But that is really kind of besides the point, because admittedly, we do have to worry about the incarceration issue, but the collateral consequences of a cannabis conviction at the federal level are huge and go way beyond prison. We're talking about negatively impacting your ability to get education, employment, housing, medical care, everything from child custody issues to professional licensure. The collateral consequences of these criminal records are huge and can really just set people back for the rest of their lives in terms of limiting their potential to be productive and fully contributing members of society and live reach their full potential. So, when people say, "Oh, this isn't letting anybody out of jail," I say, "Yeah, well, we're going to get to that." But right now, there are 6,500 people who are going to have an easier time going through life and being the best that they can be after these announcements, and those are real people.
And one of those I'm pretty sure I heard this right. Was it Goldstein, the Northeast director of NORML?
Yeah, he's definitely a person that is eligible for the pardon. I should point out as well that a pardon is not an expungement.
Right.
It doesn't actually clear your record.
You
It just
taught me
notes
that.
that like you have been pardoned on this date. But even that, that affects things like voting rights.
Right. Yeah, no, I get it. And by the way, you're the one who explained the difference, so I appreciate that. Hey, Morgan Fox, first of all, I'd love an intro to that guy, since you guys are in the same sandbox, basically, of NORML. I'd love to hear his story. I really would. I mean, you know me, I want to tell the stories of the industry. So tell him he's welcome anytime on our program here on a Friday afternoon, or even at a time that might be more convenient for him, because I really think the world needs to hear that there actually is someone out there who is positively affected by that announcement by the president. And look, even if it was window dressing, I lived to hear the day that the president of the United States recognized that the laws were not just for cannabis. And that was a huge win for the entire industry and anybody and all the advocates who are out there waving the flag and have been waving that flag for decades. So I'm not knocking anything. I'm just happy we're actually able to talk about it and continue to talk about it. And we will continue to talk about it, Morgan Fox, with you on the third Friday of every month. And I so appreciate your regularity with us. And we will be back in just a few minutes, and it would be me and Josh. And watch, we're going to juggle for 30 minutes. You're going to love this. It's going to be fun. Don't go away. Green Rush Live continues after this.
As a broker, we have access to many, many cannabis carriers. So I will go in with 2 or 3 quotes for people. The quotes might be $20,000 for one, $22,000 for another, $17,500 for another. Pretty close among the 3. What I tell people is it's not the pricing, it's what's included and not included, meaning exclusions. An exclusion in layman's terms is just something that's not included. It's not on the menu. So it's just not included. But if you don't know that, if no one shows you that on page 71 of a 150-page policy, you're not going to know. No one knows. I never met one person that says they read an insurance policy. If you do, I got some property in Florida for you.
Weed Talk and In the Weeds are 2 productions of pro-cannabis media supported by Revolutionary Clinics, one of the top medical cannabis dispensaries in the Massachusetts area, now with 3 locations in Greater Boston, 2 in Cambridge and 1 on Broadway in Somerville. Rev Clinics has a patient-first mission. They will customize your needs as a medical patient with the proper titration and combination of strains, flavors, and products. Rev Clinics, where the patient comes first.
So the reality of the matter is, big banks and small banks are going to be different in a lot of ways. And they're both going to have their advantages and disadvantages. For a business like cannabis, you really have to have an integral knowledge of that business and a real granular knowledge of that business and the players involved in it. And that's why if you look at the banks that are successful to play in this space in Massachusetts, they are smaller banks that are very heavy, intensified personal touch, human communication, where you don't get a lot of that with the bigger banks.